right, hello, Oasis.
Hey!
Yes.
We are here. We are here.
Back on the mics today.
Yes.
It's always a good episode when Ben starts singing.
We did it. We made it.
But hey, I have a question for you.
I have maybe an answer.
What is the longest line you ever waited in? And what was like going through your head? What did you feel like when you were in that line?
I think you need to go first. I'm
I
still
actually
thinking.
don't know.
I can go first.
Okay,
Yeah.
you remember?
Yeah.
All right.
So I have really bad airport anxiety,
Mm.
and it comes from the Denver airport. It's the airport I've flown out of the most, and it's like one of the most craziest airports ever. And there was this one time I was flying out for a job interview, and I show up like 2.5 hours early, which is still kind of like early, like if you're going for a flight. And I show up to TSA, I'm like, man, like there's a lot of people here. And there were actually more people trying to get through security than like on Christmas Day. So like this line that it usually takes like 40 minutes, it was going to take me 3 hours to get through.
Ooh.
And I'm going to miss my flight. I'm going to miss this job interview. And so I'm just like in line having my panic attack. I'm legit sweating. And this lady comes up to me and she's like, would you like to sign up for this free thing? And we could like take you over to this area and you might be able to get in through faster. And I probably should have said no, but I said yes. And I got through. I made my flight barely. I was like running all the way down the terminal and people were boarding and getting ready to leave and I barely made it.
Wait, so it was a good thing that you signed up for?
Yes. Kind of
Why should you have
sketch,
said
but it
no
was a
then?
good thing.
Oh.
Oh.
I don't know.
You just a little bit apprehensive to signing up for strangers' deals?
Yeah, where they're going to take a photo of my face and use it like for like facial
As long as they had the
recognition.
outfit on, right? Like she had the TSA outfit on, right?
No.
Oh.
Oh, that's bad. That's Emily. We need to have a conversation.
She just like took your picture and then walked in the other
It
direction
was
without
it was
saying
for
anything.
clear, which like
Oh yeah, I know clear.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have it. I'm not balling like you are, but
I got a 1 month free trial that I
There you go.
canceled right after I got off the
There
plane.
you go. There you go. Do you remember yours yet?
No, I don't.
See, the only one I can think of is I used to do Black Friday like really, really hard in high school. When it was back to like OG Black Friday where all the sales started at midnight, my high school friends and I, we would like make lists of all the places we wanted to go. And we just had an absolute blast shopping from midnight till 6 or 7 a.m. And we would go to these places. Like the one I can think about is Walmart. We would always go to Walmart for the video games. And it would be like, we'd get there at like 10:30. We'd have to wait in line for like an hour and a half for the store to open so that we could get the newest Madden for half price or something. But the thing I remember about it the most was Walmart was never very organized in their lines, which that feels like Walmart. But you'd show up and you'd get in line and we were like fairly respectable of the system. Like we wanted to follow the rules, but there are people who are just blatantly not, just cutting in line. They're like going around the line. And that's what always drove me berserk was if I'm going to follow the rules, I want everyone to follow the rules.
Yeah.
But if they're going to cheat, now it feels like I need to cheat,
Yeah.
you know? So that was the hard part for me of this line waiting thing was just like all the cutters or people who just act ignorant like they don't know. And it's, bruh, there is 150 people. Go back there. But
Yeah.
get fired up.
Yeah, I'm a naturally impatient person, and so I've had to work on it a lot. Probably waiting in traffic when we lived in the cities. There was one specific if you were coming into the city from the south on I-35 and you had to get onto I-94. There's only one lane in which allows you to do that, and during rush hour, after post-work, it just is crazy. And then when there's an accident, it's horrendous.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think there was one day it was like a 2.5 hour, just like waiting slow. And I remember things like, okay, how I tried to work on it was everyone's trying to get the same spot, which is home. Everyone's trying to get home. We're all have to wait. Like this is like the rage came when it was, even though there's no rules to this, the drivers that would pass you and then right at the exit squeeze in.
Dude.
I have never felt like burning you to cut
They
the
need
ground.
to put rubble strips right there
Something.
so every person who tries that, just all 4 tires popped.
You can't though, because then how do you
I don't know.
transfer
dude, that's
lanes
just,
like when it's normal traffic?
I don't know.
I know there is something that happens in my soul where the flesh comes out.
That gets me on the interstate too. Even here,
Dude,
we don't even have traffic.
and it's not even bad here.
But you can see half a mile up there, everybody's merging.
Yes.
And you're sitting in this line and there's people still. It's the like
coming out of like venues or concerts or stuff like
Yes.
that. And what's the rule? It's not a rule, but what's the rule? Zipper.
Yeah.
You zipper.
Yeah,
you
every
always
other-
zipper.
every other.
Every other.
Yep.
And then the people who don't.
Yeah, dude. People probably feel that about church, you know? Everybody's trying to get out of church after the crowded parking lot. We got to teach our people the
With
zipper.
zipper. We got to tell them the zipper.
That's going to be our next announcement. We're
I
just
think
going to
that's what it's called. I don't know if actually. I think that's what Abby calls it.
when
so
you're
that's
leaving
just what I
Grace
call it.
Point, we practice zippering.
Zipper in and out of the parking lot.
Every other person, if you don't,
Zip up.
let a pastor know. We'll be right out there to.
We'll help
No,
you zip out and zip out.
We got to get into the stuff, but
This is good.
I really hate lines. Like I know
Yeah,
you
no,
just went
can't
to Disney
stand 'em.
World a year ago already.
Yeah, but I think my sanctification has helped me in that.
Oh man, my wife has always wanted to go. She wants to take me to Disney World.
It's awesome.
She's been before. I've never been.
The lines are real though.
And I literally don't think I'd like it because of the
Yeah.
lines. I just don't understand how people take vacation to stand in line all day.
I'm going to tell you this. Know your red, yellow, and green zones when you go.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yep. Because in the green zone, and mine's in the morning. So I was patient and it was good. And we were having fun. It was the start of the day. Afternoon lines, I almost stabbed someone. I was so just not ready to like do it. But
Yeah.
the lines are aggressively long. Abby, we'll tell this story. Alice, the one thing she wanted to do was meet Elsa. So what she wanted to do? I was like, yes, God, we're going to hit that. We're going to crush that and make sure that happens. So it's the one thing you said you wanted to do while we're here. Is in Epcot, and the line was 45 minutes long to wait. There's no cuts, none of the things, none of the
Yeah, Disney's
whatever.
got it going on. They know
They
do their
stuff.
lines well.
They're really brilliant.
Yeah. No Walmart lines there.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so Abby said, I'll stay with Alice, you take the boys, and you go do other stuff. So I did, and an hour and 15 minutes waited to see Elsa. Worth it for Alice, yes.
Yeah.
And my wife is a saint. So it's just real. They're real there, but it's magical.
So as a general rule of thumb, I need the content you're bringing today. So
All right, let's
help
go.
help me.
We need your help, Emily,
be
today.
patient in line.
Will you shepherd us in this, please?
No, it's for all of us. The Holy Spirit convicted me when I wrote this.
Oh yeah.
It's for all of us, man. But we're talking about waiting. We're talking about seasons when maybe like you're just waiting for God like to move in your life, or something's happening and you just feel like you don't have control. But I think we need to acknowledge like how waiting feels and like to give yourself permission to not feel happy about the fact that you're waiting. And I think that's okay. And so like, what are some of the reasons why waiting is hard and why waiting is frustrating?
Yeah, I think part of it is, I mean, there's so many reasons, but the one I think about, even that connects to my story, is this sense of unfairness in waiting. That you feel like you're doing what you need to do to get to the thing that you're trying to do, whether that's a relationship or a career or a degree or a job. And then you see someone else get there quicker or get there in a different route or get there and you don't feel like they deserve it. And so that's the difficult part of waiting, is like, hey, you were trying to be in that relationship and they didn't even try and they got it. Or like you were trying to get that job and they got that job. And that can be really hard. And it's partly comparison. It's partly just what is fair. It's partly like you feel neglected or overlooked and unseen, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I think that we all suffer from hurry sickness, and we have subscribed to a pace that is unhealthy for our soul. And so why waiting is frustrating, even in the simple of waiting in traffic. It's because I have this understanding that I have to get to the spot that I want to get to in a specific amount of time. And when I don't get there, it's lack of control. And when I can't get there in my amount of time, frustration, anger, all the things. Yeah.
I'm going to quote Ben Geets again, but I think one of like the
Don't
most
trust him.
the frustrating thing about waiting for me is like, well, I already waited. Like, that's what I did last year. Like, why do I have to wait again? And a lot of times it's like in the same area of my life. And then that gets frustrating, where I go through seasons and rhythms where like God provides. And then I go through seasons and rhythms where I'm waiting for God to provide. And to quote Ben Geetson, like, we're perpetually in seasons of wilderness, like in seasons of waiting. But I think that waiting is a period of time where we can actively be transformed. It doesn't have to be passive, like standing in a line. Like how you choose to wait is so important, and because God's going to transform you in that. But like on the other like flip side of it, transformation can happen from anywhere, and how you choose to wait, what you choose to feed yourself with, that can also transform you into something that's not great.
That's good. Yeah. I would argue we need waiting in order to be transformed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you need the slowness, you need the stillness,
to
you need
stop.
the desert, you need the wilderness, you need
Rest, abiding.
Yeah, and I even think one of the things that I would say is probably difficult about waiting is it's often not waiting that is your actual issue.
Yeah,
Waiting
that's
is a
good.
symptom of a root of something
Yeah, that's
else
good.
that
That's
you're
super good.
feeling.
Yeah.
And so whatever you're waiting for, it's bringing out this sense of pride in you. It's bringing out this sense of insecurity. It's bringing out this selfishness. And that's really the root of what is now being shown in your impatience, your frustration, and your anger. And I like the way you said it, though. Like, we are always being transformed. Waiting just seems to be that heightened sense of transformation because we're in a place like you've talked about from James where it's a trial. Yeah. And in the trial, you're tempted to either trust God or trust something else. And so often when it gets to waiting, we feel that something's pushing back up against us. And where is it going to push us? Is it going to push us towards sanctification, towards Christ-likeness, towards patience and love and hope? Or is it going to push us towards idolatry and sin?
Yeah, it's good.
I think we see this played out in Scripture in a couple of different places. And I think one of the first ones is when God, through Moses, leads the Israelites out of slavery and into the wilderness. And one of the things that God was doing in that moment was helping Israel get Egypt out of them. Like there was like a system of Egypt of corruption, of working 24/7. And part of that process of waiting was God, like Steve Deneff would say, like creating a new economy in them. But it was the process of transforming their hearts to see that God has something more to offer. But we also see in this season of waiting, in this season of pruning, that Israel would look to other things. And like throughout the entire Old Testament, this is their story where it would start with a sense of complaining that would not be directed towards God, but that would actually create bitterness and resentment and cause comparison. And I think we see this like happening even to the point where like you read Scripture and it says like they would prostitute themselves. Like that was a word for it. Like they would forget that God is the one who is faithful for them and would even turn into idolatry. But maybe what are some examples of the people or even the stories of the Bible where we see this playing out well?
Yeah, I think in the Israelite one, the thing that comes to mind for me is the waiting season just magnified what they were already living in, like you're talking about. Like, for example, complaining. When they got into the wilderness and they didn't have food, they complained about food. And then when God gave them food, they complained that it was the same food. And then he gave them quail, and they complained about the quail, and they complained about the water, and they complained about the walk, and they complained about Moses. They complained about everything. But that's heightened in the waiting. But you can look back to when they were in Egypt, and Moses tried to advocate for them, and what'd they do? They complained about Moses. Like, why are you even trying to help us? You've made our matters worse. But before they complained about Moses, they complained about Pharaoh. And so that's the same thing that like we're seeing here is like their complaining or their sense of comparison was already there, moved into the wilderness, into the waiting period, and it magnified tenfold. Yeah. And it was there, and he was brought into, it was magnified so that it could be removed. Like it had to be zoomed in on so that God could make them see clearly what he was trying to transform them into.
Yeah, that's good.
And they had a choice of what they would be transformed into.
Yeah.
Like God clearly laid it out. He gave them the law. He gave them the leader, Moses, like to lead them. And then Moses also had other leaders underneath him to help carry the burden and to carry the load of what, like 600,000 people. Like that's a lot of people to lead. Mm-hmm. Oasis is large, but like 600,000 people. And yet like over time, like you even see like just people turning away or allowing what other people are doing to inform the truth of who God is. So like God's providing to this nation, God's providing to these people, but he's not providing to me and allowing that to like rewrite a narrative that's not true of God's character.
And one of the things I think is interesting about the Israelite story is the sense of hypocrisy that's really evident. And specifically, I'm thinking about with their sense of forgetfulness. And so you can see through their Exodus journey how often they're challenged to remember. And they're challenged to remember because they're prone to forget. They forgot God's faithfulness. They forget the Red Sea. They forget the manna. They forget God's provision along the way. And so then they complain and compare. But that sense of hypocrisy is like built into even why they were in Egypt in the first place. Right? If they were to so Joseph, his family comes over. They get this blessed land. They grow and become prosperous. And the Pharaoh forgets that they had this promise, this deal. And so he begins to oppress the Israelites. And so the Israelites so easily look towards their oppressor and they say, you forgot that we were supposed to have this land. We were supposed to be in this place. And the hypocrisy of them then forgetting so consistently in the wilderness. And I think that's something that comes out in a waiting season. It's just the sense of hypocrisy where it says that person got that because they cheated this or they lied to that or they shortcutted that or they didn't, and it's like, how often, if we flipped that same complaint back in the own mirror, that we would see it in ourselves, and how waiting can flush out even that sense of hypocrisy.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
And so, if we continue like the story of Israel, they end up becoming like a kingdom and becoming a nation and a monarchy. And so they ask God to set a king over them. And so God appoints this king named Saul. And Israel kind of wants this king named Saul. God lets them choose Saul because they think Saul is like really handsome and attractive and like looks like a king, but on the inside, his character is just like shot. And so
which becomes like that over time.
Yeah.
Because right away he trusted God.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's this like initial progression of like losing his character.
I mean, that's a whole
again.
Sorry, there's a whole message there of what does it mean to be good for a moment and good for a long time.
But we see that like within this, God like doesn't forsake his people. He actually like calls out a new king named David. But I think what's interesting is that David is called and he has to wait for a pretty long season. And Saul knows David, and Saul does not like David because Saul feels inferior. He feels insecure. And so David's in this period of waiting to become king, but Saul is actively trying to hunt him down and kill him. Yep. But I think there's a couple of things that David can teach us in like what it looks like to wait well.
Yeah. I mean, he seeks God first in the midst of the waiting, right? Read the first 13 Psalms. And if you look at the history of the amount of those in which David wrote, it goes through this progression in the midst of this waiting season as Saul is chasing him down of there's no other people who are pursuing you. It's just me. I feel alone. So community has abandoned me. God, I feel like you have abandoned me. But what I'm going to do is what? I'm going to choose to trust you. Yeah. So even when I don't feel like it, even when I literally feel alone, like you are no longer near, it's like I'm choosing to trust you because I'm seeking you first because I believe that you are still in control. That even in the midst of this wandering and this waiting, I'm going to come to you first. So in the midst of that, like when that which he's already been anointed to has yet come to fruition, he's going to seek God first. He laments what he is missing and missing out on, but allows and still invites himself to seek God first. I mean, amount of Psalms that say, I wait patiently for the Lord. I'm waiting on the Lord. My soul waits for the Lord. The Lord is not like over time and time again. It's to seek God first in the midst of the waiting, knowing he's in control and that he is good and is going to bring about what he's going to bring about because his purposes are good.
And I think like David's complaining results in a further intimacy and trust in who God is, which is very different than the Israelites where their complaining results in comparison and disbelief and like refusal to believe in like a callousness. And so like David's lament in the Psalms, like he shows us that we can complain to God, but that there is an aspect of it where we still are called to trust God and allow God to continue to write the narrative of what is true in our situation.
And that's where you're talking about Psalm. Are you going to keep going?
No,
there?
Go for it. I got it.
Psalm 2 is one that I've sat in and there's a line in there that says, may he increase the days of the king's life, his years for many generations. And when you sit and you think about that, right, in the book of Psalms, Psalm 2 is not directly attributed to David, but if you look at Acts does attribute Psalm 2 to David. So we can assume he probably wrote Psalm 2. But he writes that saying, increase the days of the king's life. He's talking about Saul.
Yeah.
Give Saul blessing. May his reign extend for many generations. May your love and your faithfulness follow him all the days of his life. What that sounds like is, God, let your will be done.
Yeah.
Right?
So
like
good.
When we're in the waiting season, how often do we pray this prayer of submission where it doesn't look like what I want it to, but God, if this is what you've chosen, would you bless it? Would it grow? Would it prosper? Would it have longevity? Even if that looks like your further oppression, your further waiting, or your further wilderness. Like,
I think
it's good.
I think one of the things I wrestle with in David's story is the way, like he would frequently say, like, I will not go against the Lord's anointed. And there's even this story, like this remastered story by Gene Edwards called The Tale of Three Kings. And it talks about this journey of David. And they translate it into like, I will not throw spears. So like when Saul is being a jerk and is like trying to kill David, David has this recognition that it's not up to him to change Saul, but that God is still in control and God is still sovereign. And so within that, David understands that his position is not to try and work to make things better, but to like rely on God, to not rely on violence, to not rely on revenge, but to say like, I'm not going to throw spears. I'm going to trust that God is in this and that God is going to fulfill what he promised to me.
Yeah, so good. And one thing that I'm like, if I could summarize one topic that I probably have the most conversations on with college students and adults, it's future. Whether it's future relationships, future job, future like comfort, future discipleship, like they're so prone to the future. But if you look at David's story, his future is formed in his present, like waiting. Like if we could turn so many of our questions where it's like, okay, what's that next internship? What's that next job? What's that next relationship? What's that next move? What's the next? If we could turn so much of that and say, what can I do now in the waiting to become the person God is creating me to be, transforming me, that I could be able to step into that? I think that would change so much about the way that we do everyday life. if we were purposeful in our waiting to embrace God's transforming of our character.
That's good.
Yeah. Well, these people in the Bible, they teach us a lot. But with the time we have left, I think, what are some practical ways that we can, Ben, you mentioned it like when we were talking to, like, not only just find purpose, but to live out the purpose God's given us.
I think it's how do I sometimes, it's exactly what you just said, rephrase the question a little bit. Do I know that which why I have a desire in my heart and I'm waiting for that to be fulfilled? How do I trust God in that? But also, where can I start in looking if I'm trying to find purpose? Like, what do I know is already to lay out in front of me? Like, what has God laid out as my purpose? Again, this is why I love the Psalms so much. I'm going to forget the reference. That's so frustrating. Wait on the Lord, be strong, let your heart take courage, wait for the Lord. And then there's another one, this is Psalm 130, where he says, I'm going to trust and wait on the Lord. I'm going to hope in his word. I'm going to wait and seek the Lord as the watchman waits and seeks for the dawn. And so watchmen, overnight, protecting the city, right? They wait, and as the dawn comes, they're safe overnight because their enemy hasn't attacked them. And then whatever, all the things. What the psalmist, and it's David, saying there is, I'm going to so seek and wait and trust and hope in the Lord, and to not just seek and wait for the future in which he's fulfilled, but right now seek him solely. Like my soul, like I'm going to seek his face. My soul longs to dwell in the beauty in the highest places of the Lord. And it's just, how do I rephrase sometimes my question in the waiting of not what's my desire? I want that to be filled. How's God going to provide in it? It's also right now the purpose of just, and I'm going to start with relationship with God, rephrasing like, how can I just seek the face of the Lord and let that be my sole desire now as I wait for what I believe he has promised to fulfill. Mm-hmm. Starting there, like you can live into that purpose of your relationship with Jesus, pursuing that holistically. Wait for him, wait for the hope of the Lord, but like pursue his face, like seek his face.
Yeah. On that, there's a sense of like hope.
Yeah.
In the relationship we seek, there's a sense of hope, which waiting has a way of crushing.
Yeah.
Waiting, when we talk about lines, like I'm never going to get through the traffic. I'm never going to make my plane. I'm never going to get the video game. Like there's this sense of waiting crushes hope, yet hope shines really, really bright when we embrace it in waiting. And some of that is just rewriting a narrative of like, my situation never gets better. I'm never going to achieve what God has put this desire in me. It's He's going to provide. Yeah. He who was promised to you will provide for you. And so continuing to grapple and grab that sense of hope in the midst of waiting is huge.
I think there's a couple other narratives that can become really destructive, and one of them is like, I'm not good enough. And I know for me, like I spent a season of my life unemployed, and I spent a season of my life applying for jobs and getting told no. Yeah. And so it's really easy to build this narrative of like, I'm not qualified, I'm not enough, like I just like don't have something or have a quality that should be getting me to these places. But it was a season for me to where like I got to counteract that with my biblical identity of like my purpose and like my worth isn't found in what I do, but it's in the person that has already told me I'm enough and has already told me that I'm worthy. And I'm just like always going back to like I love to hold the moment of Jesus's baptism where like before Jesus does anything, the Father speaks the truth of his love over his son. And so it's like, I am loved not because of what I do, but because of who I am, and getting to rewrite that narrative. What are maybe like, because I think too, Ben, you hit on it, like what questions should we be asking in this season? And I think waiting is a season where we get to ask critical questions. What might be like a couple of them that we could ask?
Is this worth waiting for? Yeah. Is this what I'm supposed to be waiting for? Is my orientation correct? Because you could be waiting in a season, and God has you waiting in a season, but you could be waiting in a season, waiting with a D, waiting towards the wrong thing. You know what I mean? Like some of the waiting is not aimlessly sitting still, but progressing forward and taking the step today that God has for you to get to tomorrow. But if you choose the wrong goal, the wrong like thing to shoot for, you can start to wander in the wrong direction, and you're still waiting, but you've increased your weight in a sense because you've walked off on the wrong direction.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah, I've been reading a work by Scott Erickson, and he's an artist theologian, and he wrote this work about depression, and like his big question is like, what do you do when your dream dies? And I think the season of waiting is recognizing that maybe a dream we had died, but maybe we were holding the wrong dream. Like maybe like we were holding a burden we weren't supposed to carry, and we can't carry that anymore. But I think one of the questions we get to ask is, what dream am I supposed to carry? Like, what dream am I supposed to live out? Like, what is like the responsibility I have in this season?
Yeah, even there's like, how do I lament the dream that is lost? How do I allow myself to discern, was this a me thing, a me dream, or was this God's dream? Like, what is God's dream? And then re-asking, like, God, what is your dream for me too, in the midst of that?
And I'm going to tweak that question a little bit. I think different questions.
Yeah.
Good question.
Yeah.
The one I would ask is, what is God doing in the waiting?
Yeah.
And the hard part of that question is, I think you need to ask it. Rarely do I think you'll get the answer.
Yeah, for sure. You'll eventually.
Eventually.
Almost never in the waiting.
Never in the waiting. And that's what I mean. So the example I think of is COVID.
good.
Right? COVID happened, and as a church, we did a lot of question asking of, what is God doing here? Let's not miss this moment. What is God doing? And I think the church holistically had a lot of questions. What's happening? What is God doing? What is God? And in the midst of COVID, I rarely think anybody got it right. Of like, God is doing blank.
Good. Yeah.
4 years later, I think I can look back on COVID and see, I think I see what God was doing. I think I see some places in the people that we're leading that he has done some things because of what he was doing there. But you have to ask the question in it because it gives you a refined sense of perspective that he is doing something. Yeah. So while you're waiting for that thing, you can ask, and you might not have clear clarity, but it's not really about what exactly is God doing. It's refining your perspective that he is doing something. And then on the other end of the waiting, when you look back, hindsight bias will be like, okay, I see the whole time he was leading me towards blank.
Yeah. And I think sometimes I have to ask myself the question in the midst of that. It's, what are you doing? It's knowing I probably won't get the answer in the waiting. What does it look like? And will I still be faithful?
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't become weary.
And I think it's taking it further and allowing that question to be, like the answer to it to be very vague, and to say maybe my purpose in this season is to love God and to love others. I think we oftentimes feel like God has to give us like the itinerary of our season and the itinerary of our day. But really, he's already given us the commands to live by, and it's to love him and to love others. And so, like, that is your purpose in the waiting. Like, whether or not, like, you have a clear path forward, like, you know that today your purpose, when you wake up, if you don't, like, know X, Y, and Z, you love God and you love others. And you can still participate in what God is doing in that moment with that.
And don't wait alone. I think you need someone in your life who will point you towards that when you're in the waiting.
You
have to, because waiting becomes very isolating. I'm waiting for this, and a lot of times the other people in my life aren't waiting for the same thing. God has each of us walking on our own spiritual journeys, but we link arms together. And so in my season of waiting where I become discouraged, I need someone to show up and say, hey, your purpose was never to achieve that. It was always to daily walk by this. Yeah. And it's in those moments where in humility you receive that, and it encourages you and challenges you for that day.
Yeah, that's good.
And then I think making a shift between like comparison and contribution, I think it's really hard in a waiting season when you're constantly looking at all the things you don't have.
Especially when other ones around you have the things in which you desire.
Yep.
It's like when you're unemployed and you just graduated and all your friends are starting their first day of work. Like, that's just never going to be a good space for you to be in. But I think you get to ask the question like, okay, I'm not at that space, but I'm in this one, and I still have something of value that I can contribute.
Yeah, that's good.
And like, God created us to work. Like, he actually created us to work in the garden. And when we're not working, I mean, we're supposed to rest too. But when we're not working, there is a sense of our purpose that we're not living out. And there's something in the fact that when we contribute, we're living into how God designed us. And so I think focusing on how we can still contribute in seasons of incomplete and seasons of waiting is super important.
Yeah. It's so good.
It's good.
I agree.
All right. Well, that's all I have for waiting.
Now we just make them wait.
Embrace your waiting.
We're all just going to sit in silence. The podcast's going to keep rolling. Emily's going to cue in some nice piano music. And for the next 6 minutes, we'd like you to just wait.
Actually,
nothing's coming at the end of the 6 minutes. We just want you to sit there and listen to your device.
We're actually going to leave and leave it on.
Yeah.
It's going to see nothing.
You're actually going to wait for me to find a piano that I can bring up here to play piano music.
All right. Peace out.